Now, in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 11, Jesus said people would lyingly say every wicked thing against lovers of truth. They lied about Jesus Christ. They spread lies about first century Christians. They spread lies about true worshipers today. We should expect lies against us, expecting persecution, expecting reproach. This is what Jesus said would happen. And especially during the Lord's Day, which we are living in right now, prophecies indicate that even at this time, reproach and persecution would become clearly evident. For example, let's open our Bibles to Revelation chapter 13 and see how this applies in our day. Revelation chapter 13, we should expect and prepare for persecution. Now, Revelation chapter 13 and verse 1, it speaks about a wild beast. Now, this wild beast is Satan's political creation among the masses of mankind. But something about this wild beast that we need to understand, and let's now go to verse 3. The wild beast, or the political creation of Satan the devil. In verse 3 it says, all the earth, mankind, followed the wild beast with admiration. So it's admired. In what sense is this wild beast admired? Well, it's admired because it endeavors to create a higher standard of living in various countries. It makes advances in technology. It tries to cure diseases. So it wins that admiration of people. Oh, look at the wild beast. But now let's go beyond admiration. Notice in verse 4 what begins to happen. And they worshiped the dragon because it gave the authority to the wild beast. There it is again. And they worshiped. People worshiped the wild beast. So now we go from admiration to worship. Worshipping the wild beast. Well, in what respect? How is it worshipped? It's worshipped when people say love of country before love of God. They put love of country, their devotion in nationalism, before their love of Jehovah God. So from admiration to worship. But now notice verse 7, what happens. And it was permitted to wage war with the holy ones true and conquer them, and it was given, now notice this, authority. So now the wild beast is given authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation. Authority, worldwide, authority over the worldwide system of rulership, tribe, people, tongue, and nation. And now it uses its authority, especially against Jehovah's people, to clamp down on the work that Jehovah God has given us to do, to try to ban our work, persecute us. That's the authority that they use against God's people. We have to be prepared for that. But now notice here in verse 8, in any authority or any victory they might have over God's people, the intense suffering, yes, that we have to undergo because of this authority, well, it's going to be short-lived. And notice in verse 8 why we say that. It says, not one of their names, that those in Satan's organization, not one of their names has been written in the scroll of life. So any apparent victory is short-lived because no one in Satan's visible organization is going to be written in the scroll of life. The only ones written in the scroll of life here are those who rule with Jesus Christ. So again, any apparent victory that they might have over God's people is merely temporary. However, we go further in verse 9, and now we have a warning. Verse 9 says, if anyone has an ear, let him hear. Well, what does this mean? Well, John now is giving direction for us to have discernment. If we have an ear of discernment, we have to hear, we have to listen. Why? Because Jehovah God is allowing the wild beast to have this type of authority. It's allowing the wild beast to operate. It's allowing the wild beast to go to these lengths. So we have to have discernment and understand what this means in our life. Well, what does it mean? Well, verse 10. If anyone is meant for captivity, he will go into captivity. So there's the persecution again, as some of us will go into captivity, or our brothers are already in captivity. We think about those in Russia or in Eritrea. They've been in captivity, but we go into captivity then. We don't compromise. We hold on to Bible principles. A little bit further, it goes on in verse 10. And if anyone will kill with the sword, he must be killed with the sword. So there it is again. Now, some of our brothers have lost their lives. They've given their lives because of not compromising. They're integrity keepers. And this is our lot in life. It could mean any one of us. But the fact is, that's why we have an ear of discernment. And now, it goes on in verse 10 and says, this is where it calls for endurance and faith on the part of the holy ones. So it will take a tremendous amount of endurance, not giving up hope in the face of an obstacle, and faith, this trust and conviction that whatever Jehovah God allows will certainly ultimately end up being in our best interests at the end. So faith, courage, endurance, not compromising, and always basing our decisions on Bible principles. Now, John goes further in verse 11. He identifies now another wild beast. He identifies a beast. This one it's a two-horned wild beast. Notice that there in verse 11. That's the Anglo-American world power. That's a two-horned wild beast. Now in verse 14, we have another beast. This is the image of the wild beast, and that's the United Nations. So the Anglo-American world power. But look what it does there in verse 14. And in verse 15, it breathes life into the image. So the Anglo-American world power breathing life into the image, the United Nations. Why? So that it can play a role in world history. It can move and exist and act and play a role in world history. And that's exactly what we see happening today during the Lord's Day. But now verse 16, and something again that we need to discern and understand and have that ear of discernment. Verse 16. Now it, again the wild beast, it puts under compulsion all people, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, the free and the slaves, that these should be marked on their right hand and on their forehead. So now we're speaking about a mark that the wild beast wants to give all of us, all people. You see, this wild beast used by the devil to maneuver the wild beast to promote intense suffering, particularly on the part of Jehovah God's people. So a mark on the right hand showing active support, actively supporting the wild beast, giving into nationalism, worldly holidays, and so forth. This is the mark of the beast. The right hand is a symbol of action and active support. And then notice even the forehead, mark on the forehead, public identity. This is who I support as well. It affects one's thinking. So the mark of the beast is something that, again, the devil uses. It's a demonic mark, so that one's promotes suffering for those who do not have the mark. And verse 17, and nobody can buy or sell except a person having the mark, the name of the wild beast, buying or selling. You can imagine that demonic mark of the wild beast. Anyone engaged in activities, normal activities such as buying or selling, is pressured to do things the way the wild beast wants them to do it. And again, whether it be holidays or supporting nationalism, they are expected to worship the wild beast. Let it rule their lives so as to receive its mark. Those who refuse to receive the mark, Jehovah's people today, will have constant problems. And this has been true for over decades. We've had to fight court battles because of not having the mark, endure violent mobs because of not having the mark, thrown into concentration camps, endure lengthy imprisonments because of not having the mark. And in fact, in some countries, our brothers literally are unable to buy or sell or even to obtain property. And yet, in spite of it all, in spite of the pressure, look at true worship today. Look at the way true worship is not just alive and well, but thriving and vibrant. This is an outstanding demonstration of Jehovah's power, his spiritual protection upon millions of his worshipers earthwide, integrity keepers. And this indisputably shows that true worship will never be extinguished from the earth. John 2 sees a great crowd that survived the Great Tribulation. So we're thrilled to be able to defend the truth in spite of this type of persecution. It's our privilege to do so. And so it's true. Peter said that people will speak abusively of us. That's true. And we're going to expect persecution. We expect reproach. But in spite of it, we are determined not to compromise our faith, not cower in fear, not tremble at men, but continue to courageously magnify Jehovah God right down to the end.